It started with one body, then another, then another. By the time anyone was paying attention, 6 bodies had been pulled from Houston's waterways in a single 11-day stretch. And people stopped calling it a coincidence. Since 2017, more than 200 people have been found dead in Houston's bayous. 200. In a city that barely blinked. But something changed. The numbers started climbing every single year, more bodies than the year before. And in the middle of it all, Houston was hit by a second scandal. One that made people question whether the dead in this city could trust the living at all. This is the story of both. To understand what's happening, you first need to understand the city itself. Houston is not like other American cities. It doesn't have dramatic mountains or crashing ocean waves. What it has is water. 2,500 miles of bayous and waterways, threading through its downtown, its parks, its poorest neighborhoods, and its wealthiest zip codes alike. These aren't picturesque rivers. They're concrete-lined channels, steep walls, muddy, slick banks, water that surges fast after a storm and turns black and still in the summer heat. When you fall into a Houston bayou, getting out is nearly impossible. The walls are vertical. The floor is coated in slick muck. There's nothing to grab. In the dark, in the rain, in any kind of impaired state, the bayou is a death trap. So yes, some of these deaths are accidents. Drownings, tragedies, people living on the streets, people in mental health crises, people who got too close to the edge. Officials have said this clearly and repeatedly. The city's DA attributed the majority of these cases to Houston's severe homelessness crisis, mental illness, and substance abuse. That explanation is real. It's legitimate. It accounts for many of the bodies, but it doesn't account for all of them. And it's the ones left over that nobody wants to talk about. Let's talk about Kenneth Cutting Jr. Kenneth was 34 years old. He was last seen alive on June 28, 2024. 3 days later, his body washed up in Buffalo Bayou, about a mile from where witnesses last placed him. A toxicology report found no drugs in his system, no alcohol, nothing. His family pushed for answers. What they got back from the autopsy raised more questions than it answered. The report listed orthopedic hardware in his neck, screws or a plate, that no one in the family had ever heard of. Kenneth had never, to anyone's knowledge, undergone surgery that would explain it. Even more troubling, the report listed his height as 4 feet 8 inches. Kenneth stood 5 feet 3. And his recorded weight at recovery was 89 pounds. His father said he weighed around 115 when he went missing just 3 days earlier. The Houston Police Department investigated, then closed the case. His family still has no answers. Then there's Jade McKissick, a 20-year-old University of Houston student, found in Brays Bayou. Her death sent shockwaves through the student community. Young, healthy, a college campus nearby. It didn't fit the profile officials kept describing: the homeless, the addicted, the mentally ill. Her death, combined with several others in rapid succession, is what turned a local concern into a national conversation. Between September 2024 and September 2025, the pace of discoveries accelerated dramatically. In one stretch, 7 bodies were found in less than a month. City council members started fielding calls from terrified constituents. Students were being warned to walk in pairs near the bayous, and nearly half of all cases, across 2 full years of deaths, remained officially classified as undetermined. Not accidents, not suicides, not homicides. Undetermined, meaning investigators could not establish, with reasonable medical certainty, how these people died. That's not closure. That's an open wound. He was visibly frustrated. He called the serial killer theories misinformation. He said, and this is a direct quote, "Enough is enough of wild speculation." He told the room that if there were a serial killer operating in Houston, people would hear it from him first. The Harris County DA stood beside him. There is nothing, and I want to be crystal clear, nothing to indicate that there is someone operating here as a serial killer. Local criminologists backed them up. Experts pointed out that serial killers typically don't dispose of bodies in open waterways in the middle of a major city in broad proximity to witnesses. They noted that drownings are extremely uncommon in known serial killer cases. They explained that without the medical examiner ruling deaths as homicides, and without identified commonalities between victims, you cannot formally connect cases. All of that is true, but here's what made the public skeptical. The official communication had been a disaster. Different outlets were reporting wildly different numbers. One TV station said 13 bodies, another said 24. A third reported 16. The Harris County Medical Examiner's data wasn't being released in any organized way. Families couldn't get straight answers. Community leaders said they had to beg for basic information. City Council member Letitia Plummer put it plainly. It was a misstep to not take the fear, take the comments of our community to heart, and act on it with more decisive information and in a more timely manner. When institutions communicate poorly, people fill the silence with their own conclusions. And in this case, the silence had been deafening for years, because this wasn't new. 200 bodies since 2017. And this was the first press conference about it. Now here's where this story gets darker. Because while Houston was grappling with mysterious deaths in its waterways, something else was unfolding in a Southwest Houston funeral home. Something that, on its own, would be one of the most disturbing local scandals in recent memory. Richardson Mortuary sits on Brookfield Drive. It had operated for years. Families trusted it with their most devastating moments. The death of a parent, a sibling, a child. They paid for dignity. They paid for care. They paid for the most basic promise a society makes to its dead, that they will be treated with respect. That promise was broken. In April 2025, a woman named Tamara Magruder went to Richardson Mortuary to drop off clothes for her mother's funeral. She was denied entry, but the back door was open. Construction workers were inside. She walked in. What she found will stay with anyone who hears it. Her mother's body was in a state of advanced decay, covered in insects, left in the open, not in cold storage, not in a prepared room, just left. She saw other bodies around her in similar condition. The building had no working air conditioning. The smell was described as unbearable. Her brother Davin came when she called. He started filming and posted the video to social media. Within hours, a crowd had gathered outside the mortuary. Dozens of families who had used Richardson, all suddenly desperate to know what had happened to their loved ones. While Davin was inside, a mortuary employee stabbed him. He drove himself to the hospital. State regulators moved quickly. The Texas Funeral Service Commission ordered Richardson Mortuary to cease all operations immediately. When investigators completed their inspection, the scope of what they found was staggering. 13 bodies had been stored in non-refrigerated, filthy conditions. One body had decomposed to the point of liquefaction. 70 sets of cremated remains were found in a damaged section of the building, poorly labeled, poorly stored, some essentially unidentifiable. Investigators found families who had paid thousands of dollars for services that were never performed. One family had paid more than $17,000. Some families had been waiting over a year to receive their loved ones' remains. Owners Michael Richardson, age 72, and Gail Bell, age 63, former spouses who ran the business together, were each charged with 3 felony counts of abuse of a corpse. Richardson's defense attorney claimed his client had been hospitalized and wasn't involved in daily operations. Bell reportedly claimed the mortuary was damaged during Hurricane Beryl and that Richardson was responsible for repairs. As of late 2025, 57 sets of cremated remains still hadn't been claimed because families didn't even know they needed to come forward. Police spent 6 months trying to locate next of kin. They had only returned 22 sets of remains by the time the public was notified. Think about that. For some of those families, they buried their grief and moved on, not knowing that the person they thought was buried or cremated was still sitting in a damaged building on Brookfield Drive. Now, step back. In the same city, in overlapping months, you have 2 crises unfolding simultaneously. Bodies turning up in waterways at a record pace, with nearly half of cases carrying no explanation, and families being stonewalled when they ask questions. And a funeral home where the bodies of the already dead were being left to rot, where records were in chaos, where the institution entrusted with the most sacred duty imaginable had catastrophically failed. These 2 scandals are not directly connected. Let me be clear about that. There is no evidence, none, linking Richardson Mortuary to the Bayou deaths. Investigators have not suggested any such connection. The 2 cases are legally and factually separate, but they collided in the public mind for a reason. Because both of them speak to the same underlying fear, that institutions in this city, the police, the medical examiner, the funeral homes, the elected officials, cannot be trusted to tell the truth about what happens to the dead. When families can't get straight answers about how their son drowned with no drugs in his system, when a mother's body is found rotting in a funeral home a year after her children paid for her burial, when autopsy reports list the wrong height, the wrong weight, hardware no one can explain, people stop believing in the official version. And when people stop believing in the official version, every unanswered question becomes evidence of something worse. That's what happened in Houston. That's what's still happening. Let's answer the question directly. Based on publicly available evidence, criminological standards, and official investigations, there is no confirmed serial killer operating in Houston's bayous. The criteria for establishing serial homicide require, at minimum, that individual deaths be ruled homicides and that investigators identify meaningful patterns linking them. Neither of those thresholds has been met. The majority of Bayou deaths have not been ruled homicides. Those that have been ruled homicides resulted in arrests, separate, unconnected cases. Experts point out that disposing of bodies in public waterways in a major metropolitan area would be an extraordinarily risky method for a serial predator. Modern forensic tools, digital footprints, surveillance cameras, cell data, make sustained, undetected predation increasingly difficult. The official explanation, homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse, the physical danger of the bayous themselves, is consistent with the evidence. But the number of undetermined cases is genuinely troubling. When you cannot establish cause of death in nearly half of your cases over a 2-year period, that's not a closed book. That's an open question. The discrepancies in Kenneth Cutting's autopsy have never been publicly explained. The pace of deaths, doubling, then doubling again, hasn't fully been explained either. And the institutional failures surrounding the Richardson mortuary scandal have made it harder for the public to take official reassurances at face value. In the absence of transparency, suspicion fills the space. That's not irrational. That's human. Here's what we know for certain. More than 200 people have died in Houston's waterways since 2017. Most of them were men. Most of them were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Many of them were unhoused. Many of them were struggling. They deserved more than an undetermined ruling filed in a database. Their families deserved answers, real answers, delivered clearly, without having to fight for them. The Magruder family deserved to bury their mother with dignity. Instead, they got a decomposing body, a son who got stabbed trying to find out the truth, and a lawsuit that should never have had to be filed. Kenneth Cutting's family deserved an autopsy report that made sense. Instead, they got a file full of numbers that didn't match the person they knew. The University of Houston students who walked past Bray's Bayou every day deserved to feel safe. Instead, they got a press conference that came weeks too late. Whatever the true explanation is for what's happening in Houston, and it may be mundane, it may be systemic, it may be something in between, the city's institutions owe the public something they have consistently failed to deliver. The truth, clearly, on time. Until that changes, the questions won't go away. And they shouldn't. 200 bodies, dozens of unanswered cases. A mortuary scandal that stripped families of their final goodbye, and a city government that held its first press conference about all of it in 2025, 8 years after the first body was pulled from the water. The bayou keeps moving. The water doesn't keep secrets forever. If you've been following this story, if you have a family member whose case was never resolved, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments below. And if this video made you think, share it. Because the only thing more dangerous than a city with unanswered questions is a city that stops asking them. I'll see you in the next one.